Imagine losing every cent you've earned in a web of lies spun by Wall Street's most trusted man. Bernie Madoff wasn't just another financier. He was Wall Street royalty, an esteemed former chairman of NASDAQ, trusted by billionaires, celebrities, charitable foundations, and everyday investors alike. Yet beneath his polished facade lay the largest financial fraud in modern history, a $65 billion Ponzi scheme meticulously hidden in plain sight for decades. How did one man fool financial regulators, evade detection, and deceive thousands of sophisticated investors worldwide? Today, we unravel the stunning rise and catastrophic collapse of Bernie Madoff, a story of breathtaking deception, regulatory failure, and devastating human costs that reshaped finance forever. Bernie Madoff was once regarded as a Wall Street legend. He founded his own firm in 1960 and steadily built it into a financial powerhouse. By the late 1980s, Madoff's brokerage was executing an enormous volume of trades, earning him around $100 million a year. He even served as the chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange in 1990, 1991, and 1993, cementing his reputation as a financial innovator and insider. Investors and institutions alike saw Madoff as a trusted star in finance, a self-made market maker who always seemed one step ahead of the market. His skill and track record were so legendary that people practically begged for the chance to invest with him. Publicly, Madoff cultivated an image of integrity and exclusivity. He was active in industry organizations and philanthropy, which only boosted his credibility. His client list included famous charities, pension funds, wealthy individuals, and international banks. To those fortunate enough to be accepted as Madoff clients, it felt like joining an elite club. Yet behind this sterling reputation, Bernie Madoff was hiding a dark secret. As early as the 1980s, he had quietly begun a fraudulent investment scheme alongside his legitimate business. He claimed to employ a sophisticated hedging strategy that could generate profits in all market conditions. Year after year, he reported steady, positive returns for his investors, gains so consistent that they defied normal market behavior. In reality, securities regulators would later discover that Madoff hadn't executed a single trade for his investment clients in decades. Beneath the veneer of a respected financier, Bernie Madoff was orchestrating the largest Ponzi scheme in history. Madoff's entire investment advisory business was a lie built on deception and secrecy. He attracted clients by promising an exclusive investment strategy called split strike conversion, which he described as a reliable method to profit in both up and down markets. In truth, there was no magical strategy. Madoff simply deposited investors' funds into a single bank account and used that money to pay returns to earlier investors who requested withdrawals. Incoming cash from new investors was cycled out to pay profits to existing clients, the classic Ponzi scheme model. No actual stock trades were being conducted on behalf of those clients, despite the detailed account statements they received. Every profit recorded on those statements was fictitious, fabricated after the fact to show a smooth upward trend. On paper, Madoff's numbers looked almost too good, yet they were carefully calibrated to avoid raising alarm. Unlike typical Ponzi schemes that promise outrageously high returns, Madoff's reported returns were impressively consistent, but not absurd, roughly 10% to 12% per year like clockwork. He appealed to investors' desire for stability rather than greed. For example, during one 87-month span, Madoff claimed only 3 losing months in his fund's performance, whereas the S&P 500 index had 28 losing months in the same period, an implausible record that would later be likened to a baseball player batting .966 for an entire season. Yet many investors, comforted by Madoff's prestige and steady hand, accepted those results without question. Strict isolation from his legitimate trading business. In Manhattan's Lipstick Building, his firm occupied multiple floors, with the legitimate market-making business on one floor and the Ponzi operations hidden on the 17th floor behind locked doors. Only a small, tight-knit staff of fewer than 24 employees worked on that 17th floor hedge fund division. There they fabricated trading reports and account statements to substantiate the fake returns. They even used historical market data to make the lies convincing. Investigators later discovered that Madoff's team would take real historical trades in price data, for instance, past prices of blue-chip stocks or options, and retroactively craft winning trades for client accounts. One longtime employee, David Kugel, realized that the trades on his clients' statements were copies of real arbitrage trades he had executed in the past, just with altered quantities. Immediately, he's like, "This whole thing is a fraud. These are fake trades," an FBI agent recounted Kugel's discovery. Rather than expose the scheme, Kugel and others joined in the cover-up. They were rewarded handsomely for their silence, paid huge sums, and allowed to set their own salaries. Everything about Madoff's investment business was designed to avoid scrutiny. He refused to let outsiders see his trading activity, citing the need to protect his proprietary strategy. In fact, Madoff had never registered his investment advisory unit with the SEC as required, for fear that an audit would unravel the lie. He accepted new investors only by referral and often initially turned people away, creating an aura of exclusivity and trust. Many of his victims felt privileged just to have an account with Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. This selective approach meant that even as the scheme grew to manage tens of billions of dollars on paper, it remained insular. Investors rarely compared notes, and those who did were reassured by the consistent stories and returns. Madoff's clients ranged from wealthy individuals to charitable foundations, and about 10% of the money he took in came from nonprofits, money that would later vanish when the fraud collapsed. It is still a matter of debate when Madoff truly began his Ponzi scheme. Madoff himself claimed that he only started the fraudulent practices in the early 1990s during a period of economic recession. However, some colleagues believe the deceit went back much further. Frank DePascali, Madoff's account manager who had been with the firm since the 1970s, would later say the fraud had been occurring for as long as I remember. Regardless of its exact origin, by the 2000s, Bernie Madoff was running a sprawling deception. On the surface, he was a venerable money manager delivering consistent gains. Behind closed doors, he was scrambling to keep the illusion alive with each new deposit. The mechanics of the scheme were simple in principle: use new investors' money to pay earlier investors. But Madoff's reputation and careful choreography kept it going for decades. As long as most clients left their money invested and new funds flowed in, the house of cards held up. But this precarious empire would not survive. For years, skeptics questioned Bernie Madoff's consistently steady returns. In 1999, investment analyst Harry Markopoulos examined Madoff's strategy and quickly found the numbers impossible. Within hours, Markopoulos concluded Madoff was either running a Ponzi scheme or illegally front-running trades. Either way, investors were at serious risk. Markopoulos first alerted the SEC about Madoff in May 2000, showing evidence the returns were impossible. Despite repeated warnings, including a detailed 21-page report in 2005 titled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud," explicitly identifying Madoff's firm as a massive Ponzi scheme, the SEC took no action. Markopoulos highlighted multiple red flags, noting Madoff's unrealistically flawless track record, and even offered to go undercover to prove the fraud. Despite clear warnings, the SEC repeatedly failed to expose Madoff. Regulators investigated multiple times from 1992 onwards, but never uncovered the fraud. Even in 2005, when prompted by Markopoulos, the SEC accepted Madoff's fabricated transaction records without proper verification. Author Diana B. Henrique summarized it perfectly: the lie was simply too large to fit into the agency's limited imagination. Madoff's respected status as a former NASDAQ chairman shielded him from scrutiny. A clear conflict arose when an SEC examiner became romantically involved with Madoff's niece in 2006, raising doubts about the regulator's objectivity. Whistleblower Markopoulos grew frustrated, fearing for his safety due to Madoff's powerful influence. In congressional testimony, he sharply criticized regulators for their failure, admitting he stayed anonymous early on because he feared Madoff might retaliate. Throughout the early 2000s, journalists and financial experts questioned Madoff's suspiciously consistent returns and unrealistic trading volumes. Yet his reputation and investors' complacency silenced doubts. Fund managers, benefiting from fees, ignored obvious red flags. Ultimately, widespread greed and willful blindness allowed Madoff's Ponzi scheme to balloon to an astonishing scale, roughly $65 billion across nearly 4,800 accounts by 2008. In 2008, the illusion of Bernie Madoff's empire finally shattered. The global financial crisis that year put extreme pressure on investors everywhere, including Madoff's clients. As markets plummeted, many of Madoff's investors began demanding to withdraw their funds, either because they needed cash or because they were spooked. Normally, Madoff had little trouble paying out redemptions using new incoming investments. But now new investments dried up while withdrawal requests snowballed. By early December 2008, clients had asked for an estimated $7 billion back from Madoff's fund, and he simply did not have the money. The Ponzi scheme was running on fumes. By December 2008, Bernie Madoff knew his scheme was collapsing. On December 3rd, he admitted to his aide, Frank DePasquale, "I'm out of money." Facing mounting redemption demands, Madoff hastily planned to distribute remaining funds to family and select employees before confessing. On December 10th, after handing out final bonuses at a holiday party, he invited his sons Mark and Andrew, who suspected something was wrong, to his penthouse to reveal the truth. On December 10th, 2008, Bernie Madoff confessed privately to his wife and sons, "I'm running a Ponzi scheme and we're out of money." Shocked, his sons Mark and Andrew immediately reported him to authorities. The next morning, FBI agents confronted Madoff, who candidly admitted, "There is no innocent explanation. I've been running a massive Ponzi scheme." With that, Madoff was arrested, abruptly ending one of history's largest financial frauds and devastating thousands of investors. After his December 2008 arrest, Bernie Madoff faced intense public anger and swift legal action, charged with fraud, money laundering, perjury, and theft. Initially placed under house arrest on a $10 million bond, he was soon jailed as investigators discovered he had never executed any trades for clients. It was all elaborate fraud. Authorities also found $173 million in checks Madoff had planned to distribute to family and associates, prompting the judge to revoke his bail and incarcerate him awaiting trial. On March 12, 2009, Bernie Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 felony charges, openly admitting in court to orchestrating a massive Ponzi scheme. He accepted full responsibility, acknowledging he had deeply hurt many people. During his sentencing on June 29, 2009, victims described devastating financial and emotional losses, including retirees left penniless and charities forced to shut down. The profound human toll was underscored by a victim who tragically took his own life due to shame and despair. Illustrating the immense damage caused by Madoff's betrayal, Judge Denny Chin sentenced Bernie Madoff to the maximum 150 years in prison, effectively ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Victims in the courtroom applauded, finally feeling justice was served. Madoff expressed regret, acknowledging his legacy of shame, while Judge Chin described the crimes as extraordinarily evil. The symbolic severity of the sentence underscored the immense scale and harm of Madoff's betrayal. While Madoff was the face of the scheme, the legal fallout did not end with him. Prosecutors and the FBI turned their attention to Madoff's colleagues and family members to determine who else might have been complicit. Madoff had insisted from the start that he alone was responsible, claiming that his wife and sons knew nothing of the fraud. Nonetheless, investigators were skeptical that a fraud of this magnitude was executed entirely by one man. In the months after the guilty plea, federal agents effectively moved into Madoff's offices, seizing documents and interviewing employees. A total of 14 individuals, including top executives in Madoff's operation, were eventually charged for aiding the fraud or for related crimes. Frank DePasquale, Madoff's right-hand man and chief financial officer on the 17th floor, agreed to cooperate with authorities and provided detailed testimony about how they cooked the books. DePasquale's information proved crucial in securing convictions of several other staff members who claimed ignorance. Even Madoff's younger brother, Peter Madoff, who had served as the firm's chief compliance officer, admitted guilt for falsifying records. Peter Madoff was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and forced to forfeit essentially all of his personal assets. Several back-office employees, including those who helped generate fake account statements and computer records, were also found guilty and given prison terms. The message was clear: this was not a one-man operation, and anyone who helped perpetuate the lie would be held accountable. The collapse of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme left thousands of lives in ruin. When the dust settled, court-appointed trustee Irving Picard and his team cataloged the losses and found that about 4,800 clients had invested a total of roughly $17.5 billion in principal with Madoff over the years. Many victims were ordinary individuals, retirees, families, small business owners, who saw their life savings vanish overnight. Others were institutions and charities. Venerable nonprofit foundations had their endowments wiped out, forcing some to close their doors. The financial devastation was amplified by the betrayal and broken trust. For many, Madoff's fraud was not just a monetary loss, but a deeply personal one. He had been a friend, a philanthropist, or a respected advisor in their lives. The psychological toll was immense. In addition to the one investor's suicide before sentencing, Madoff's own investors in Europe also took tragic steps. For example, a French fund manager who had placed his clients' money with Madoff died by suicide shortly after the scheme was revealed. Following Madoff's sentencing, authorities launched extensive efforts to recover assets through a forensic clawback process, suing banks, feeder funds, and early investors who had cashed out fake profits. Billions have since been reclaimed, and over $4 billion has been redistributed to victims through a dedicated fund. However, most investors received only a fraction of their losses, leading to ongoing legal battles to ensure fair distribution amid the complex fallout of the historic fraud. The Madoff scandal devastated his family. Ruth Madoff, never charged but publicly vilified, forfeited most assets and was left financially and socially ruined. Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, insisted they knew nothing until their father's confession. Both severed ties after reporting him. Tragically, Mark died by suicide exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, and Andrew succumbed to cancer in 2014. Ultimately, Bernie Madoff's legacy of shame permanently linked his family name to betrayal and fraud. Bernie Madoff died in prison in 2021 at age 82, serving just 12 years of his 150-year sentence. His massive fraud triggered extensive regulatory reforms and harsh criticism of the SEC's failures, exposing deep incompetence and inertia within the agency. The scandal became a cautionary tale of regulatory failure and misplaced trust, permanently altering public skepticism toward investments that seem too good to be true. A man who was once a pillar of Wall Street built his success on a lie and managed to deceive some of the savviest figures in finance for decades. The downfall of his $65 billion Ponzi empire was as dramatic as it was devastating. A high-stakes thriller played out in boardrooms, living rooms, and courtrooms. Madoff's victims, numbering in the thousands, have had to rebuild their lives from the wreckage, and the financial world has had to reckon with how one charismatic fraudster exploited the system so completely. The saga serves as a stark reminder that even the most respected facade can hide a ruinous deceit. Bernie Madoff once boasted of his uncanny ability to outsmart the markets. In the end, he only succeeded in outsmarting himself, leaving behind a legacy that will haunt Wall Street for generations to come. If this deep dive into one of history's darkest financial chapters captivated you, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories from the hidden world of finance and beyond.